On the ground, back in Maryland, with the Lord Baltimore back in control, they changed the names of the counties back. Remember, the Puritans had changed the names of all the counties to get rid of the Catholic and royal associations. Well, now they changed the names back. And this is also here in 1658, 1659, the first creation of Baltimore County. So you can see now that they've stretched all the way up the Chesapeake. So Charles County is back. You can see on the map here, Charles County, it's actually sort of a different place than it was before. St. Mary's County, Calvert County, Anne Arundel, Baltimore, and Kent. In 1660, Fendall. Okay, so the events that go down here, it becomes referred to in Maryland as Fendall's Rebellion. I think that gives Josias Fendall too much credit. Here's the way I think things went down. Remember that when Lord Baltimore was back in charge, he created the elected lower house and the unelected upper house, right? The lower house obviously didn't like this. I mean, it means that, okay, we're elected, but we can't do what the people want if the people appointed by Lord Baltimore don't also want to do it. You can see where this system feels totally fair to Lord Baltimore, because he's like, dudes, I own the colony. Of course you shouldn't do anything I don't want you to do. But if you live over here and you're now, used to this democratic tradition, then Lord Baltimore's new system feels unfair to you. So I think this should be called the Rebellion of the Lower House. But it doesn't have the same ring to it. So here's the way I understand it. The lower house, the one that's elected by the landowners in Maryland, they seized power. They basically said, we claim the right to do what we want to without the upper house. And really, if you're saying we don't need the upper house, you're also saying we don't need Lord Baltimore. So one of the key figures here was actually William Fuller, the guy who had led the Puritans at the Battle of the Severn, and who Lord Baltimore had spared from any punishment. And obviously he appreciated that and never tried to do anything wrong again. No, instead, he's conspiring to try to get rid of Lord Baltimore's authority once again. So the way I read it, Josias Fendall kind of went along with all this. I think, and maybe I'm being too charitable to Josias Fendall, but he, on the ground as governor, he's like, oh, these guys are seizing power. And then they said, we'll basically leave you in position with a new title. And he said, okay. And the whole idea was that they were going to set up a commonwealth separate from Lord Baltimore's authority. They were hoping that they could get approval for all of this because Oliver Cromwell was dead. Cromwell had died, here we go. Cromwell had died in 1658, so he was Lord Protector right up until the time he died. But after he died, his son took power, and so the rebels down in Maryland, this is just a political rebellion, right? Nobody's hurt anybody. But they were hoping that Cromwell's son would approve what they were doing. But that all collapsed because back in England, people really were not that into the idea of having Oliver Cromwell's son rule England. He didn't have the same riz as Oliver Cromwell had, and to a lot of people it was like, wait, if we're just going to let his son rule, then aren't we back at monarchy? And in 1661, Charles II returned from exile and was restored to the throne in England. So the long English Civil War, if we include the period with Oliver Cromwell, was over. It had started back in 1642, and in 1661, Charles II was on the throne. And Charles II was totally in Lord Baltimore's corner. And so Fendall's rebellion collapsed. Cecil, the Lord Baltimore, appointed Philip Calvert, his younger brother, as the new governor in Maryland, obviously not wanting to keep Josias Fendall around. So he appointed Philip, and Lord Baltimore writes to his little brother Phil and says, Phil, I want you to execute that Josias Fendall dude. And Philip writes him back and is like, look, big bro, you don't know the circumstances on the ground here. I am convinced if we execute Josias Fendall, it's going to make the hostility to our family worse. So, come on. Let's show some leniency. So again, the Calverts show leniency. They barred Josias Fendall from office. They took away his right to vote, but spared his life. I'm not sure the extent to which Philip's insistence on not executing Josias Fendall led to Philip's swift replacement. So, family tree, right? Here's George, remember the original Lord Baltimore, and here's Cecil, the second Lord Baltimore. Remember his little brother Leonard, who had been the governor, and here's Philip, who was briefly governor. But in 1661, Cecil replaced little brother Philip with Cecil's son, Charles. Charles Calvert, now 24 years old, became the new Maryland governor. Cecil appears to have had more trust in his son than in his little brother. Okay, so I know in the lecture outline, the key term says Charles Calvert. And right now we just spent like, what, a minute, 2 minutes on Charles Calvert. As with a lot of our characters, he'll reappear in your notes. And if on like a big quiz or on a test, you have to write a paragraph about Charles Calvert, you'll want to include not just the information that was right there, but put together the information that we'll also talk about later with him, right? So your paragraph is comprehensive. Okay, so we'll have more to say about Charlie Calv. But next, quickly I wanted to mention that, remember, the population's growing quickly now. And so in the 1660s, there were a bunch of new counties recognized. Talbot County, Somerset County, Dorchester County, and Worcester County. The part of the effort here was that you can see that now these counties fill both sides of the Chesapeake Bay. And while there weren't many people out on the Delaware Bay side of this peninsula, there was this increasing fear that the New York colony, which was controlled by this powerful guy, the Duke of York, the fear was that they were going to try to seize the Delaware Bay. So Maryland was now trying hard to make it clear, oh no, this belongs to Maryland. We've got government out there. So we'll see how this works out for them, if they are able to keep that. We'll see. In 1666, Cecil Calvert helped this guy, George Alsop, whose name you see down here, publish this pamphlet back in London called A Character of the Province of Maryland. It was like, you know how you get like a tourist pamphlet or a promotional pamphlet that tells you how great this place would be to move to? That's really what this was. It was really effective back in England. It sold Maryland as a wonderful land of opportunity. And it contributed to Maryland's rapidly growing population. Remember I told you that Maryland had 1,000 people by 1650, 10,000 people by 1675. Well, by 1700, it had crossed 30,000 people. So that means in 50 years, they went from 1,000 to 30,000. And this was part of that. The next place that we're headed to is to some of these religious groups who proliferated in Maryland because Maryland was a place of religious toleration. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time with those as we finish part 1.